Everyone. Welcome to Legal Limelight. Today I have my friend and colleague and former classmate, Pamela Grutman here, who is a top New York trust and estates attorney and also art lawyer. Pamela advises high net worth individuals, small businesses, and fiduciaries in the arts community on sophisticated trust and estates planning, estates administration, and succession planning for long term preservation of artistic and philanthropic legacies utilizing trusts, family partnerships, and nonprofit organizations. She counsels art world clients on all types of art transactions with a focus on sales and income tax consequences. Pamela, that's one heck of a background and a skill set. It's really exciting, and thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to see you here.
So I know I just like listed off a ton of terms that may have people think like, okay, what are those? But let's start with art law. How would you define art law?
Yeah, so art law is not really like a thing. It's not a separate jurisprudence. It's really the application of all of the law that you're familiar with that we studied in school: constitutional law, contracts, commercial law, international law, intellectual property, and of course, tax, which is my sort of specialty in all of that. But as it's applied to the visual arts, to artists, to collectors, to galleries and auction houses that deal in fine art, visual art. Sometimes we get into other areas of art like performing art or other kinds of entertainment, but primarily it's about the visual arts.
And what in within art law would you say is like your specialty?
Yeah, so I'm actually trained as a tax lawyer. I use that term loosely, but I do have a master's in tax. So I approach the matters I deal with from a tax background, and I work with people in the art world on all sorts of issues related to wealth transfer. So either that's moving accumulated wealth between generations. It's about preserving legacy for artists and collectors who have built themselves a cultural legacy with a wide, with worldwide impact. It's also about nonprofit organizations who need other people's wealth to operate. So it's sort of an all-encompassing perspective
It's it's
in that world.
it's great, and it overlaps with IP, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that I deal especially with artists about is the transfer of their intellectual property rights, because certainly, as when someone purchases a work of fine art, they don't purchase the copyright. The copyright remains with the artist, and depending on how the artist created that work, they retain the copyright for their lifetime plus 70 years, or if it's held inside a business entity for a different length of period. But there are all sorts of complications with termination rights and such, so we need to make sure that they're handled properly.
Yes. And I always bring up these issues to clients that either have bigger portfolios or are starting to create intellectual property portfolios, that ownership is really important, but not only ownership, structuring and estate planning. So hopefully I can send more things your way, Pamela, because everyone needs you. It's something a lot of people don't want to think about, but that's the reality, is we need to plan for the future.
Absolutely.
So then we talked a little bit about art law. What's trust and estates for people who don't know?
Yeah, so traditionally that's about planning in the event of your death, where your assets would go. At the basic level, that means drafting a will. Everyone over the age of 18 needs to have a will. And possibly even more importantly, it's planning for your incapacity. What happens if you are sick in the hospital and can't make medical decisions for yourself? Who's going to be able to access your bank accounts to pay for medical bills or your other kinds of living expenses? So that's the traditional parts of trust and estates. Is I've also said, for me, it's about legacy planning. And so
Mhm.
whether that means, naming a guardian for your child and what values you want your child to be brought up with in the event you can't bring up your kid yourself. We work with ways to sort of um, memorialize those instructions, but also, you know, what's the legacy of an artist? What's the legacy of a collector? Like far beyond their lifetime.
So that's a term that I that I've heard. I don't know too much about. Can you go into detail on what exactly that entails?
Yeah, legacy is about your values. So it's not the same. There's not like a cookie cutter approach to legacy planning. But when I meet with a client, we have discussions about what they want to see happen with their things, but usually it stems from a conversation on value. Are you looking to provide your loved ones with financial security? Are you looking to make sure that they're productive members of society? Do you have philanthropic causes that are important to you? But it's about looking past your own life and into the broader world.
When it comes to intellectual property, have you seen any major, because I know we went to Cardozo, you've definitely, Pamela also knows intellectual property. So, what are some of the main IP issues that you have seen, if any?
Yeah, particularly with copyrights that have the financial benefit of being able to be, for lack of a better word, exploited, but to be financially, uh, you know, um, utilized. So when
Mhm.
I'm working with artists, many of them have imagery that it would work very well on items of fashion, on textiles, on furnishings. And so some clients love that idea. Some artists think that that's a way to make their artwork accessible to a larger public. And other artist clients are horrified by the thought of their imagery being on merchandise. And so we need to be able to control what happens when the artist is no longer here. Of course, during their life, they have all of the ability to do those things if they so choose. And I have clients who have done that. You may have seen, I did not work on it, but you may have seen recent like Basquiat and Keith Haring works. I forgot who their partnership is with.
Tiffany.
Is with Tiffany, but also they're all over the place. Like you see their images on all sorts of merchandise, and that is a way for their estates to produce revenue. When I'm working with artist foundations and they're looking to do good in the world, long after they're no longer here, the artist is no longer here. The copyrights and merchandising, licensing, that is a way for the artists estates to continue to generate revenue without having to liquidate, potential, the remaining artwork. I know that the Warhol Foundation, which has a very large philanthropic grant making program, nets $2 to $4 million a year just from their royalty licensing program. So
Yes.
there's lots of things that come up, but when it comes to an artist, when it comes to their estate, having someone who can police the market, who can make sure that their works are not being used in ways that they would find intolerable is very, very important.
Yes, no, it completely is. And that's why I think that art law is this like big umbrella. But when it comes down to it, you really need the clients need to work with people who have actually advised in that industry versus going to anyone who does taxes or anyone who does estate planning. That term art law is really something where it's industry specific. And although it's technically not like a particular type of law like trust and estates or wills, it really is important to get the right lawyer. Like everything you're saying, Pamela, you could tell your experience. You could tell that this is stuff that you deal with on a daily basis. It overlaps with intellectual property, but these are things I really I leave to experts like you, which is why you're here. So when it comes to ownership in estates, I remember that it was someone who one of the people that is a very well-known artist, they were just registering the trademarks in the name. The artist had passed, so the family was just registering the names in the name of the estate of X. And
Hmm.
it turns out that, like, when I pushed back I always check to see ownership, like the chain of title, they just made that up. There was no formal legal entity called the estate of X. So, can you talk about that generally? Like, I know that none of this is legal advice, but generally,
I,
like, what are
I
estates supposed to do?
I'm laughing because this comes up all the time
All the
where
time.
you'll see like you go to a museum and it'll say like copyright the estate of artist.
Hmm.
And I laugh because the estate is not a legal entity that exists forever. It's kind of a term of art in the art world of how we refer to a deceased artist. But most of the time, if it's done properly, there's an LLC or a corporation or something that holds the copyright or potentially holds the artist's artwork that's remaining. But the estate's closed, right? The estate opens up when the decedent dies, when a decedent is someone who dies. So that it opens up at that moment in time. And then eventually it closes, somewhere between 10 years, maybe. Some estates go on for a while because they're complicated, but the estate is not a perpetual entity. And so the copyrights, the other property get distributed according to the provisions of a will. If there isn't a will or another, testamentary document like a trust, then you follow intestate statute. Every state has law about who inherits if there is no document.
Hmm. I'm just thinking I need to tell everyone that we just recently did our will with Pamela. It's really important because we're talking, a lot of lawyers are going to watch us too, but there's also non-lawyers. And so when we talk testamentary documents, like think this is a document that it's a will. So you either have a will or you don't have a will. And then what Pamela basically said is that, and it's up to the states and the statutes and the government to figure out who owns what. So everyone needs to do their will.
Yeah, one of my first questions, I'm like, do you like your siblings? Like, do you like your parents? Do you like, because if you don't get something in place, those are the likely candidates for inheritance.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Um, so and then going back to that example of that artist, so what they did, and I don't know, I'm not a corporate lawyer, and I know you're not either, but I believe that there was a way that they were able to actually formalize the entity.
Mhm.
It was then formally called the estate of
Sure,
X.
you can create an LLC or a corporation called the estate of such and such. Like that's certainly not a problem, but it isn't an estate. Estates are governed by different parts of the law. In New York, it's governed by the EPTL. Under federal tax law, it's governed by chapters 13, 15, and 16 versus different chapters. So you have to know what you have in order to have
Yeah,
proper, like obviously proper corporate treatment and also proper tax treatment.
it's a super important point for any creatives and artists because once you file with the government like a trademark or your copyrights, if it's in the name of the estate of, and all of a sudden the estate, like just as Pamela explained, is not a real entity, it becomes a question of ownership.
Mhm.
So and whenever you do that, like you're entering the gray area of law where now it becomes a legal battle and think dollars. And so it's always worth talking to an intellectual property lawyer, but I go further and I tell clients you should talk to an art lawyer if they're artists about estate planning because there's so much that comes that you could get involved with. And unfortunately, things sometimes end up in the wrong hands, and that's just another way to enter into crazy litigation, which is what we want to avoid.
Absolutely.
So, what's your day to day like on a daily basis?
The good thing is I don't have a day-to-day. Most days consist of some combination of drafting and advising clients, but there are some days I'm working on nonprofit governance work. Other days I'm advising artist clients on their estate plans. Other day, I mean, what was it? Yesterday I was advising a client on sales tax on the purchase of an $18.5 million Picasso. So there's lots of things that come up, and I think one of the reasons I ended up becoming a lawyer and doing this kind of work is that it wouldn't be the same every day.
So great transition to our next question. How did you end up how did you end up as a lawyer? And I know a little bit about this because I know you. And then how did you end up in your field?
Yeah, so I went to law school knowing that this is what I wanted to do, and I actually, as you know, formed my own solo practice when I was admitted to my third bar. I'm actually admitted in 3 states, which is a little insane sometimes.
And your LLM, right?
And I have a master's in tax, yes. But I sort of grew up in this world. My dad is an accountant for artists, which and about a third of my practice overlaps with the accounting firm. I actually have an office in their accounting suite, so it's a family affair
That's
at
great.
times. But I ended up working for the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation right after the artist had passed away. And so I worked with the estate and the foundation in getting them ready to receive about $2 billion of assets. And so I was about 25 when that was all happening. And I was working with the foundation's attorney. And often board members would ask me a question first, and I would sort of give them an answer. And then they were like, oh, but we have to check with the attorney. And they would call the attorney who would give them basically
Literally.
the same answer. And I was like,
The right answer.
so I went to law school. I got my master's really as credentials for the work I wanted to do.
Okay. But yes. And then you went to Cardozo where we've overlapped, and I cannot believe how long ago it was.
Not
But
that long. It was yesterday.
oh
You still
yeah.
look the same.
And I'm still in my 20s.
I was still in my 20s when I went to law school, but was not 20s when I graduated. We'll leave it at
Oh,
that.
oh my gosh, no. It's crazy. Like time really does fly, and it's fun to have this conversation with you now, like very established and all these really interesting things you're working on. So it's super exciting. Um, so what are some of the tips that you would give law students, speaking of law school, to
Yeah.
enter into art law or trust and estates?
Yeah. So I get a lot of calls from law students. I, talk to them pretty well. I used to be a little more regularly, but and they're interested in art law mostly because they love art. And so I'm always like, well, if you want to be around art and if like you're going to enter art law for that reason, you'll be disappointed. Most of the time I see like little tiny squares of art on my computer screen. But in my free time, I get to go, see art, and I get invited to really fun things. But my day-to-day job is I'm a practicing attorney. And so I tell students that you got to go and become the best lawyer you can be. Find out what you love. Do you love protecting artists? Then maybe specializing in intellectual property is the way to go. If you like the commercial wheeling and dealing, you want to be, you really like contract work. Some people love the theater and the theatrics of litigation. And so you can certainly be a litigator, and there are lots of specialties in that. There's insurance, there's restitution, there's commercial disputes, and of course, there's also criminal prosecution in the art world. So you really have to go and become a specialist. And then I always tell students, take a tax course, because at the very least, it will give you a backbone in so many things that can be used in the art world. And many of the big art lawyers, the ones who sort of got their footing and sort of created this field, were actually originally tax lawyers. So there's really a strong thread of tax through the art world.
That's so interesting. That's great advice, Pamela. So here's a fun question. We're lawyers, and like you're right. Like at the end of the day, what's your date? Like we're lawyers. Like as glamorous it sounds to advise artists and celebrities and fashion, we're in paperwork and we're on the phone and we're looking and researching things. So you're right. Like I get the same thing with students sometimes that just say, I want to be fashion attorney or I want to be entertainment attorney. And the reality is, I take a step back and I say, well, what law do you like? Because like I'm an intellectual property attorney that happens to have a specialty in dealing with fashion clients and entertainment clients. But I don't really I always hesitate when they talk about fashion law or those types of broad umbrellas because you really need to know what law you like.
It's an industry at the end of the day. It's not the law.
Correct. So, what's your favorite hobby outside of work? We're lawyers, but we also like to have fun. So, what do you do for fun?
You make it sound like we have so much free time these days.
Oh gosh.
No, I mean, I still love going to museums and galleries, although it often feels like an extension of my work. You have to stay on top of those things in order to continue to build your business. So when I really just like need to veg, I'm like everyone else and just want to stay home and watch a movie or a good TV show or really bad TV shows. But yeah. So,
Do you what's the most recent show that you've been watching or you binge watched?
what? So I end up watching Marvel stuff so I have something to talk about with my younger brother. So we recently finished Loki. It's
Is it what was it?
Loki on Disney Plus, like
Oh,
part
okay.
of the
Okay,
Marvel thing.
cool.
So yeah, it creates like a standing date for us to like check up. So because
You know
otherwise,
what? Like, that's the thing is like, I definitely think people like watch Netflix way too much and that's bad, but I like it. It's a part of my like rest and recoveries to watch shows because you need to be culturally relevant and you connect with people watching shows.
also true. Yes, being culturally relevant, knowing what's happening on the news, like those are all things that help you stay interesting and get you out of your own bubble.
And we're coming up to the end of the clock, but I would love to know, and this is like one of my favorite questions to ask. If you could give yourself advice 5 years ago, what would it be?
Yeah, so careers are building blocks. They're not linear. You can't compare yourself to what anyone else is doing, but every client, every matter, every referral and referral partner you have puts another block on your career. And, the senior partner of my firm, like I applied for an internship with him multiple times while I was in law school. I got rejected every single time. He was like a big name in the art law community. And then when I finished my master's, he called me to join
Wow.
his firm. And because I had a skill set that his firm didn't have, and he didn't want to refer that work out anymore, and he wanted to bring it in. And, now he's my partner, like less than 3 years after that first call, we're, partners in a law firm together.
I love that.
So you just don't know. But don't compare yourself to anyone. And that's hard because you watch people and like you see them go from like one title to the next title to the next title. But that's not a career. Titles are not a career. Your relationships are.
Oh, that's the soundbite of the day. Titles are not a career, relationships are. Everything comes down to relationships. And as I'm sure you've seen, because you are a partner and you have to bring in your own business, I've learned this too, becoming a partner in the pandemic, that everything is relationship based. Everything. You cannot go to a networking event for the purpose of getting a job or getting someone to just hire you. It's see through and it's palpable, and people will not want to invest in you. But when you go and you network and you meet people because you're interested in them and eager to help them, and you build a relationship and you touch base, like that's the essence of everything.
Yeah, I have a number of classmates, from Cardozo who have become clients or referral partners. I, I've met people at networking events 2, 3, 5 years ago who I, never thought about again, but somehow remembered me. Or, I put on my mailing list. And so like, I did think, I shouldn't say never thought about them again, but people sort of like come into your life, but they remember you, and they call you for when something comes up. So you just got to keep meeting new people and reaching out and building those connections.
It's so true. Like this, like, thank you.
Like
Thank you for
this.
coming on here and for staying connected. Pamela's also referred me work and I'm her client. And that's how everything works. So Pamela, this was amazing. How can people, what's the best way that people can get in touch with you?
Um, all forms of social media, which is basically just my name. You can go to, I have PamelaGrutman.com is my solo practices firm. It's still up. It's still got a lot of good details. Or you can go to my firm's website at occllp.com and contact me through there.
Amazing. Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you.
This for those of you who watched live, thank you. For those of you who are going to watch the recording, I will have the link to Pamela's website below. And this is Legal Limelight. I hope everyone learned and had a really good time here. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, Pamela.
Thanks.